Okay, now good morning. There we go. All right. So good morning and welcome. We're glad you're here. And we have a few little announcements before we get started. So let me come right over here and pick up announcements. So this is a booklet that has options for senior care if anybody is, interested in looking at that. This is from UNT Health Science Center. This is their geriatric program. We've had some of these out before, but if you know anyone who needs a very good geriatric assessment, UNT has one of the best, and so that's what this is about. This, you know that we're doing, well, many of you know, that we are leading Dementia Friendly Fort Worth, and we're so excited. And we had a meeting yesterday with people who volunteered to be on the executive committee for it. Great enthusiasm, and it just seems to be just spreading out into the city, so we're super excited about that. We have some educational things that really are particularly related to Dementia Friendly Fort Worth, and I want to tell you about these two because everyone in this room qualifies to come to one of these. Anybody can go to anything, but these are of particular interest to you. And this one is on February 22nd, which is a Thursday, and the morning session from 9 to 12 is how can we become dementia-friendly faith communities, because we got a long way to go in our churches and faith communities in becoming more dementia-friendly and helping people who have dementia and their family members feel comfortable being in our worship settings, because sometimes they tend to, as soon as they get the diagnosis, they just start backing away, and then all of a sudden we don't see them anymore. So that's what this one's about. And then in the afternoon, the same speaker is going to talk about developing dementia-friendly neighborhoods and residential care communities. All of us live in a neighborhood. 60% of the people with dementia live in the neighborhood. Most people think they live in residential care facilities, but they don't. 60% live in the neighborhood. That means they live down the street from you and me. And we need to learn how to be dementia-friendly neighbors. And so this session is about how to be more dementia-friendly with the people that live down the street from us. And especially for residential care communities that are not memory care certified, which is the overwhelming majority. They're not always well trained, and so we want to make sure that we help them as well. So that's what these sessions are for, and that's on Thursday, February 22nd. I'm going to send these around, and if you didn't get one and you need, and it runs out before it gets to you, but we have plenty over here. So that one's really important. Please tell, if you're not a member here, if you are a member here, tell people in your Sunday school class and all that, come that Thursday, February 22nd, 9 o'clock. If you're not a member of this faith community, please tell your faith community, whoever it is. This is for clergy and for laity. This is not just for preachers. This is for all of us who are members of faith communities. Thank you very much. If you are interested in learning more about Dementia Friendly Fort Worth and maybe participating in some way, these are sign-up cards, and we have these over on the table over here. Please sign up. We'll put you on the email list that is specifically for Dementia Friendly Fort Worth. So that's what this is for, and you have options on here about ways that you can become a part of that. And it's super exciting to see what God is doing in that. It's really neat. Then this is the newest, the latest and greatest brochure for what we're doing here at the church. So you'll want to make sure you have a new one because we have some new things in there and we have some date changes because of some scheduling conflicts. So you want to make sure that you get the newest brochure. It has the events that we're doing, and then there are some that are specifically marked. The Dementia Friendly Fort Worth events are marked. We are also hosting the State of Texas Health and Human Services Commission for a dementia training that they do in May. The newest one that we just volunteered to host, and it's not in here even yet, in July, we'll be hosting dementia activities training that the Health and Human Services Commission is doing. So we're excited about being able to host all of these great events. So be sure you go home with a new brochure because these have the latest and most accurate dates. And so that is information for you. And for any of you who may be from a dementia, a residential care community, Teepa Snow's group, Positive Approach to Care, is doing a trainer certification workshop. It's a 2-day workshop. It's $1,600. Just tell you that up front. It's here, and it's in March 15th and 16th, and it's almost full. It's limited to 25 people, and they told me yesterday that they're almost full. So if any of you have been thinking about doing that, or you know someone who might be interested in doing that, if you really want to do it here where you don't have to travel, you better sign up quickly because it's almost full. Anything else that I need to say? Okay. All right. I do want to say this. We were really grateful to Nikki this morning, not just because she's here, but because she stepped in to take over for the speaker that we had lined up. We had Barb Hardy, who works at UNT Health Science Center, and who has presented many times on this topic. And so we had her signed up to come, and unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago, I think, her husband had a very severe stroke and was on the vent in ICU for quite some time. But I learned yesterday that he is out of the hospital in rehab and actually stood up yesterday, they said. So we're very excited about that. Yeah, that's really great news. And so obviously she is devoting her time to her husband. So we're very, very grateful that Nikki agreed to come and speak for us. She's also a social worker, used to work at UNT Health Science Center, and now is with Silverado, which is out in Southwest Fort Worth. We had Silverado folks here last month when we had memory care providers. So we're very grateful. We're going to video record this. We're going to start trying to do this so that people that can't come may have access to it through our library or online. So if you're going to make a comment or ask a question, please give me time to get to you with the microphone. And somebody nudge me if I forget to get up and go, because we want to make sure that the questions get on the tape as well, okay? So Nikki, thank you so very much. We appreciate you coming.
Let's see if this works. Yay, it did. Okay, so like she said, I'm Nikki. I'm a licensed master social worker. I've been working in the field of dementia care for about 8.5 years. I started my journey in a dementia, in a Jerry Psych hospital is what we would call it, and that is a hospital where we usually send folks who have psychiatric issues, a lot of dementia with behavior issues. So I started there as an intern. I've done hospice, so end-of-life care with dementia resident or patients in a hospice setting. And then I have worked for the Alzheimer's Association right here in the North Central Texas chapter here in Fort Worth. I worked for them. I was a dementia care specialist there and did counseling for them for about a year, and then went to UNT Health Science Center with Dr. Abel and their team. I was their lead social worker and faculty there and taught, and then I had a baby and stayed home for 18 months, and that's where I have been. And then knew when it was time to go back to work that I wanted to work in one of Dr. Knabel's entities, and was very particular about what I wanted to do since I'm very specialized in Alzheimer's disease and dementia care. And so Silverado it is. I am on their leadership team now, and I am officially the director of resident engagement, and I have a large team in charge of all of the fun stuff. I'm the director of fun, but I'm also doing community presentations and stuff for Silverado. So know Barb Hardy very well, worked with her very closely at UNT, and so we'll be praying for her husband as he continues to heal. Now, this is a topic that I have not presented on just a whole lot of times. I will be real honest with you. So as we thumb through this, we're going to be doing this together. So how many people in here are members of the church? Okay, quite a few. How many in here actually work with either dementia residents, dementia patients in various settings? So a few professionals. Anybody in here have loved ones who have dementia? Lots of us. Okay, so I was just kind of wanting to see kind of who my audience was. Okay, I tend to talk fast. If I'm talking too fast, let me know, because that's something I do. Also, if you have a question, just interrupt me and we'll get you the microphone, okay? So we're going to be talking about intimacy and sexuality when it comes to a person with dementia, okay? Well, we're going to be talking about it in general, but we're going to specifically look at how that affects a person with dementia. So first and foremost, we are all sexual beings. Everybody has that need and desire, and when you have dementia, it's still there. You just might not know how to appropriately express those feelings or state those desires, okay? So first off, caring for a loved one with dementia can be very hard, and you have to accommodate the disease because they cannot. So a person who has dementia doesn't know how to compensate in those areas. So we, as their family or loved one, or in this situation, significant other, a lot of times would have to be the ones who accommodate and really change our own way of thinking when it comes to those things. So your role changes a lot of times from a partner to a caregiver when you're in this situation. And that changes the sexual relationship. it is very common for there to now be less sexual feelings. It's normal. So if you have ever been in that situation, or you are working with a family, for some of you guys who are professionals, and you have one spouse who still super has those desires and the other one doesn't, it's real important to try to find a balance and help that spouse who is trying to be the caregiver and the partner, help them kind of normalize those feelings, because we often feel guilty about the way we're feeling. Again, we're sexual beings, and it's normal to have those feelings. The loved one may no longer be interested in sexual intimacy or be able to perform. What gets you together sexually will change as the disease grows. I like to give lots of examples because I've been in this field for a while and I've seen lots of things happen. But you will have a person, we're just going to use an example, a male, who has, their relationship's always been kind of consistent. You kind of get in your patterns. And as this gentleman is diagnosed and the disease process starts to work, in the beginning things may still be very normal, but as it starts to get, as the disease progresses, this gentleman may no longer be able to do things that he once was able to do. So it's really funny because I feel so odd because I'm like the youngest one in this room. So I'm like trying to be careful. So it's like that respect your elders thing, and I'm like, how do you talk about these things? So a gentleman who, there was foreplay, and there was things that always kind of led up to that moment. They may no longer be able to do that. They may no longer realize what's happening. So it may become more direct, like they want it and they want it right now, but they're not able to tell you that. And so the wife is missing the cues, because for their whole relationship, it's been kind of their standard. They've always done it, a certain way. And so now it's different. And the person with dementia can no longer, maybe they don't remember, or maybe they're not able to process kind of the way that relationship once was. So I have seen multiple situations where the person with dementia, we'll just call it a male. We're going to talk about females too, I promise, gentlemen. But you'll see with a male that there might be some odd behavior start to happen. So you might see that there is masturbation, and it's something this man has never done. You might see them making crude comments about young females, or you're walking through a grocery store and you always hear that old pervert term. They make a comment, and we often don't even realize what is happening, because that is something that's very common in the earlier stages of dementia. And your husband and wives will start fighting, and then when it comes down to it, there ends up being a diagnosis, and people have not realized what was going on, because that is something that happens very early with some of the dementias. In particular, frontotemporal dementia is one of the dementias we see the sexual inappropriateness with more than others. So just throw that out there. Okay, so everyone has a right to intimacy, okay? So there's this misconception that when folks move into a long-term care community, whether that be assisted living, independent living, memory care, whatever it is, that they no longer have these desires. That is not true. I will tell you that. Now, it does forever change the way in which spouses relate to each other, and it changes behaviors and expectations. So that's kind of what I was just talking about. Relationships that have often been nurtured for many years, that's going to change. And again, that comes on the person who is not diagnosed with dementia. So it's our expectations that have to change often with that. I worked with a family one time, and we had the old pervert scenario, but it was a daughter, and she was so embarrassed. She's like, my dad's making these comments, and and we're like, okay, so here we go. We have to work through that process and really explain to her, it's not your dad, it's the disease, and kind of work through that, because it can be really heartbreaking for a family when this is new behavior. You're like, this is not my dad. That is very common. Things you've never seen before. But the point there to remember is it's not the person, it's the disease. And it's the disease working and the brain changing. And so that person they once were is changing, and we have to adjust. So there's all kinds of physical intimacy, kissing, cuddling, touching, massage, hugging, just sitting beside one another and holding hands, and then, of course, sexual intercourse. So there's lots of different things that you can consider intimate, okay? Sexuality is a continuing human need common to all people. As we age, we have little change in our interest in sex and intimacy. That's researched and proven that whatever you develop very early in your marriage or in your life, that routine and pattern tends to somewhat stay the same throughout a marriage, kind of whatever that is that works for in that marriage. And as a person ages, those needs are usually still there, and the desires, and even as we change and our bodies change and we get older, typically a husband and a wife stay attracted to one another, even though there's all these changes. And so it's been proven that kind of whatever's developed in the early stages of a marriage tend to kind of somewhat stay about the same. That's normal. So when the dementia kicks in, that's when you start really seeing the differences change. Ladies can lose more of their sex drive than a man. And so you'll see that. And there's all the misconceptions that women no longer have a sex drive after menopause. That is not necessarily proven to be true. Some women may. There's always that some women. We all respond differently to different things. So one thing is, it's definitely still okay for a husband and wife to be sexually intimate if a person has dementia. A lot of times we'll hear people say, well, they no longer can consent. Well, this is a husband and wife that have been married for a really long time. So I think that consent was made a long time ago, So yes, maybe not new relationships, but a lot of times you see that one spouse will withdraw because they feel like it's no longer a two-way street. But if you think about it and you stop and you look back at it, that spouse probably still wants the other spouse to be happy. They just no longer can voice that, no longer can get that out. So, I've heard that a million times. Like, I still want to, but I'm afraid. But just know that, I don't think you have to have consent once you've been married for 15 years. It's one of those things. It's been natural. It's something that's gone on for many years. So, myths. Elderly no longer have interest in sex. That is a lie. My grandpa and my grandmother, I don't need to know details about anything, but he holds her hand always. It's like they have been married, 62 years. He still holds her hand when they're out in public. He still opens the car door for her. He will walk past and pat her on the backside. And we're like, Grandpa. But they've been married for 62 years and they're happy. They're doing something right. Women are unable to have orgasms after menopause. That is a myth. The idea of sexuality in the aged is shameful or perverse. That is something that, for those of us who work in senior living communities, we are often much younger than the people that we're caring for. And we'll hear, people say things like, that's so gross. I'm often like, when I'm doing education, I'm like, what's gross about it? They were young once too, like everybody ages. And so we have to be very careful when we work in senior living communities to make sure that everybody's safe, and especially in dementia care, memory care communities like mine, because they may not be able to consent to it anymore, and those are new relationships. So we do have to be very careful, but at the same time, we have to respect their right and their needs and make sure that they're still treated with respect and dignity, and that they still have their rights, because they are still humans. So that's always a touchy subject in communities. So frail old people will get hurt having sex. That is a myth. So we'll just keep moving. So if the spirit is willing is what this is titled here. And this is a PowerPoint that was actually created by Barb. So I'm following her PowerPoint here. But there will sometimes be health-related factors that you have to take into consideration. Things like diabetes, hypertension, depression, prostate problems. All of those can affect sexual desire. So that's very common with health-related issues. Heart disease, osteoporosis, arthritis, incontinence. I want to stop there because, again, when a person moves through the dementia process to a point where they're now possibly incontinent, that's going to probably definitely affect a sex drive. A person who is now wearing a diaper or adult brief or whatever you want to call them, that is going to change that area in general. It's going to, everything that was once known is now going to be different there. So you have rashes sometimes, it's different. And so you will see with incontinence that it can decrease a sex drive. So that's something to point out. Again, typically, or a lot of times, that's something we deal with in the senior living communities is incontinence. So that's very common when you get to the middle stages of the dementias, and especially toward the end, is the incontinence. Okay, so inappropriate sexual behaviors. This is where it gets tricky. There are so many times that we see inappropriate sexual behaviors from both males and females with dementia. I mentioned earlier, this is those that are real touchy for families because now you have to figure out how to manage those behaviors, and especially when you're out in public. So to make sure, because people in public don't know that dad or mom or sister or brother has dementia, and so they just find it inappropriate. So things like fondling, hugging, or kissing strangers. It happens, guys. In a community, in the community I live in, we have one gentleman who is like the most loving, affectionate person ever. That's great. But when he comes in to kiss us on our lips, we have to compensate. It's our responsibility to step back or turn our cheek. Now, you don't make a big deal out of it because we don't want him to be shamed for it, because that's his nature, that's his personality, but we need to compensate. So it's my responsibility to turn my cheek or pat him on the back or find a way to compensate for that desire that he has. He is often trying to hug and kiss, and that's just his personality. Undressing or being naked in public. This is something, again, that's very common with dementia. This is one of those things that often got them sent to that Jerry Psych hospital. Police officers would pick them up in the middle of the street and they were naked. And so those are the kind of behaviors that we have to manage. But it's very common in the later stages of dementia. It's also very common in some specific forms of dementia. Using sexual Latin language. This is another one too. In the early stages, someone who's never been, always been prim and proper and now is making comments about strangers and the way they look and, making sexual gestures. Suggestive behavior or language, aggressive or repeated sexual overtures, exposing oneself during personal care tasks. We see that in communities sometimes. You're changing them and you're helping them bathe, and sometimes that can become an inappropriate time, and we'll see gestures. And so if you are in a good community who knows how to correctly respond, so those highly trained memory cares, it's all about redirection. We never want to shame them. We never want them to feel like they've done something wrong because they don't know. And so we really train our caregivers on how to redirect those behaviors and it not become a problem. So that's the key there. And then masturbating in public. It happens, and it happens often. Again, that's one of those behaviors that when it does happen, somebody's usually calling saying they're crazy and calling the cops, and they usually end up in a Jerry Psych hospital, and doctors are going, okay, what do we need to do? Medication adjustments, is it environmental, what's happening here? Typically, there's an unmet need, and we have to figure out what it is when there's behaviors like this going on. Then, is it really sexual? Okay, so the man walking down the street naked, is it really a sexual gesture, or is this just a man walking down the street naked? Often it's just a man walking down, it's just this guy has dementia and he didn't know how to put his clothes on, or that tag on the back of his pants was rubbing him wrong and it was bothering him, so he took those pants off. He didn't know to put more pants back on. It was uncomfortable, and that's what we do. We take them off when something's bugging us because we cannot verbalize why. We're uncomfortable, we're hot, but we can't verbalize it. Take those clothes off. And now we're outside, and we're unaware of our surroundings because we have dementia. So those are the kind of things that professionals in cities like Fort Worth who become dementia friendly, we're looking at those things and not just automatically assuming that this person is a predator or out to do something. So I think that's really important as far as being aware of our surroundings and stuff, is we don't always assume the worst, because someone with dementia truly has no idea of they're unaware is the best way to put it. So fondling genitals. Is that a sexual behavior? I'm telling you, I have seen many a men with their hands down their pants. It's something men do sometimes, adjusting it or whatever they're doing. But it's common, men do it. And again, I think we automatically assume that it's sexual. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's that we're misunderstanding what they're trying to say. Maybe, again, they're uncomfortable. Their underwear are too tight, their underwear are crooked, and they're not able to tell us, so that's what's happening. She has a question. Microphone.
I just wanted an example of how you redirect in some of these behaviors.
So, okay. So say we are in a community and we are undressing someone for a shower. In the community I live in, every single room that I live in, the community I work in, every single room has a private restroom with a private shower. So everyone has their own area. So, of course, you're typically one-on-one when you're doing bathing and changing. And so say a gentleman, and I don't know why I keep going there, so men, please don't feel like I'm singling you out. An erection occurs. We'll just go there. So whatever it is that's triggered that, it happens. And so that can become uncomfortable. So at that point, we would, instead of making a big deal about it, you would turn the hot water on, encourage them to go ahead and get in the shower, give them some privacy. The key is you don't point it out, okay? So if in that same moment a resident were to make a comment, say they were to say, I don't even know what a good example is, but say they were to say something that then led you to believe that they were having that sexual thought, instead of you saying, oh no, or correcting that thought, you would just say, how about we get in the shower? Like, you just completely try to redirect and change the conversation. Try to make them comfortable. So that's what I was saying with like that hot shower, or give them the privacy and let them kind of go through that phase without shaming them. So a lot of times we will be quick to correct or quick to say, oh, I'm not your wife, or that's inappropriate, and again, that's kind of shameful to that person when really they didn't have like that sexual feeling toward that person, but we will feel that way kind of in that instant, which is, it's understandable, it's kind of an uncomfortable situation. So the key there is to redirect without shaming. Does that make sense? Okay. Like, did I even answer that question? Okay, so getting in bed with another resident happens every day. For many years of our lives, we slept next to our partner, whoever that was. We're used to that comfort of a two-person bed. We have a resident who will not go to sleep if there's not someone there with her. It's very common. It's very common for them to seek out, and there's nothing sexual about it. It's just that comfort of having someone there with you. Yes, it becomes a very tricky game to play, because families will get very upset when you come in and there's someone in your loved one's bed. So we have to be constantly aware of it and watching kind of what's happening. We have a few residents who we know really seek out someone to lay with. And so we intentionally try to kind of pair them up, especially if families are like, oh yeah, And so there's nothing sexual about it. It is that comfort and that feeling of knowing that someone's there with you, feeling another human breathe. It's part of who we are. And so that's not something that goes away. That is what keeps us going when we have dementia, is that human touch, that's what's still there, that compassion. So misinterpreting cues from others. So I've already kind of said that. Is it sexual? Most of the time it probably isn't even truly sexual. It's that we are misunderstanding because they can't verbalize to us what's happening. And then hypersexuality. This is also common in some forms of dementia. The person will become super hypersexual. So now they want to do it all the time. But that's not the norm. So then the other spouse is uncomfortable. So again, that's where we have to compensate. We have talked with some families where now the spouse is every day, and you have to figure out a way to kind of redirect that, because this person with dementia, we can't explain to them we can't do this every day. So how do you compensate for that? Often, sometimes it's in ways that we don't really want to. But if masturbation is gonna work, let's let them do that. So that situation can be very tricky, and we have to be very careful about how we do that. But we need to find a way to compensate for what their desires are, their needs, without it causing more stress on the caregiver or the spouse. And also, that's something in a community setting that's very tricky. So, we've had a few residents that had what's called a penis pump. That's a DME device that's actually specifically made for things like this. There are things out there, and we just have to find ways to provide them with some private time with respect and dignity. This is one of the most touchy subjects I think that we can encounter with dementia, is because it's most of the time misinterpreted. So this next slide is all about deserving of respect. So a person often loses their awareness of their needs, rights, and wishes. So that they no longer can typically verbalize to us kind of what they're wanting, what their needs are. Person no longer understands the consequences of their actions on themselves or how it impacts others. So that's very, very important there. They no longer realize, if I do this, what's going to happen. And so that's where, in a community setting, it's our job to redirect that. Or if you have a loved one living at home or in the community, then that really falls on that caregiver, because they cannot process what's going to happen next. Loses social skills, or may have made company less desired. So people may be uncomfortable coming into their home. Yes, ma'am, she has a question.
I'm Vanna.
Just so you know, because I kind of get that you don't know, like, I'm not a professional. I'm a sexuality educator, and so I'm really interested in the work when I ever see us taking on sexuality and dementia. And I want to kind of go back to the point. There's 2 points, but the most recent was they don't understand the consequences of their actions. And given the STD and the STI rise in this particular age group, and the difficulty with which the caregivers or the families, they don't want to talk about it. It's something I encounter all the time. So nobody is wanting to talk about it, and they're dying not only of Alzheimer's or dementia or any of these other geriatric diseases, they're also dying of AIDS, and syphilis is mutating. And so how do you manage that in a community?
It is tough. So there's a big difference when we talk about community, okay? So let's just break that down. You have things from a nursing home, a long-term care facility, where you have seniors who may not necessarily have dementia, but they have physical limitations that have now put them into a community like that. So a long-term care facility, we'll call it. Of course, then there's your rehab facilities. These are folks who hope to go home after they finish a rehab from whatever reason. So it can be, needing antibiotics. It can be broken bones, those things. So that's a rehab setting. Then you have independent living, which are your active senior living communities, where most of them still live in small apartments or condos, and most of them still drive or still very active, but now we live in the senior living community. It's a safe place. It's mostly all seniors. The grounds are usually kept for us. It's just a nice apartment complex or a community that is specifically for seniors, okay? Then you have assisted living. So these are folks who now need a little more assistance. Most of the assisted livings are going to have meals, so you can now go eat in the dining room or in a restaurant style setting. You don't necessarily have to, because a lot of times they have like a small kitchenette and they can still do some cooking, but might need a little more assistance. These are folks who might need some medication management, so now we have a nurse that's passing meds out. those kind of things. And then you have your your memory care communities, which are what I work in. A memory care community, everybody in that building has been diagnosed with some form of cognitive impairment. So that can be a wide range of the dementias. It can be many different things going on, but everybody in that building has some form of cognitive impairment. So statistics show that the highest rate of those geriatric STDs and STIs and all of that fall into that nursing home setting. Okay, so these are those folks who are physically limited, but still can function. A lot of times in a nursing home setting, so long-term care, those folks are there with funding from Medicaid, which is long-term care Medicaid. So they qualify for Medicaid to pay for them to be there, or they have long-term care insurance or something another. So that's where the statistics show that's kind of where those STDs are coming from. In those settings, those folks are usually there for many years. So these are folks who have, they can live there, like 5 to 10 years or something. The Medicaid doesn't necessarily expire in 2 years because there's nothing that says how long a person's going to live. So those homes are the hardest place to control it, because when you have a funding like Medicaid, you have higher or lower staff to patient ratios. You have the training of the staff is not nearly as good, because again, we're talking that funding source. Okay, when you're talking a community like ours, it's a completely different ballgame. We're talking very high end. It's expensive to live here, and it's private pay only, or long-term care insurance, or maybe some veterans assistance. But to live here, so when you pay that kind of money, you're expecting that you're going to get that kind of care. So our staff to resident ratios are much lower. Our staff is all trained in dementia care. We are all dementia care certified, every single person on our team. You're going to get in-services monthly on how to deal with that kind of thing. So how do you deal with it? You create things like Dementia Friendly Fort Worth and education programs, and unfortunately, I don't know that it's going to change anytime soon. I don't know that we can change the way long-term care facilities are ran right now. I don't know that we're going to change funding. I don't know that there's an answer to that question. It all kind of depends. And then when you're talking active senior living communities, these seniors live on their own. They're completely independent. They have all their own rights. I mean, they can still do everything they want to do, just like if you're living in college. I mean, I'd like to see those statistics compared to college dorms, because... Okay, there you go. So she's saying that the statistics on senior living communities and college dorms, as far as STDs and sexual transmitted diseases, they are like a competitor. I can see that. It would be very kind of the same setting. So there's that.
Let me just say a word too from an assisted living perspective, because you guys know that I teach that. This is a very difficult subject, because when we know that we have 2 residents who are not married or are not long-term partners, or whatever the current politically correct language is, this is a new relationship and they don't know each other that well. When we know that we have 2 people who have now become sexually active, then the concern is, are they having safe sex? I mean, let's just be honest.
Right.
And it's very difficult because we have, there are HIPAA restrictions, and we have to be very careful. So it's a tap dance. I will just tell you that we tap dance with the families, because oftentimes the couple's fine, but the kids are not, and it's his kids and her kids. And that's where you get into real huge issues, is that, okay, his kids are okay if his dad has a relationship with a woman, but her kids are not okay because that's not their daddy. And so it gets to be very, very difficult. And this is another reason why it's so important for us to understand dementia and understand what Nikki's saying, is that the need for intimacy never goes away. It never goes away. It may be expressed differently with hand holding and walking arm in arm and all those kinds of things. But for some seniors, it lasts until the end of life nearly, right, for there to be sexual intercourse. Right. And so you are absolutely right. The constraints of confidentiality make it extremely difficult.
Yes.
If we know there's a sexually transmitted disease, then we usually recommend that you contact your county health department and see what guidance they might give you, just to say, confidentially, not tell them a name or anything, but just say, okay, if I suspect this, what am I supposed to do? Because not, a lot of us don't know what to do. So we usually just recommend that you at least ask for guidance, not pass along names or anything, but that you ask for help.
Right.
Because most of our communities are not well trained in that, and probably we could learn a lot from you, since that's what you do. And so you and I need to chat later
Yes.
about that, because it is an important issue, and most of us don't realize, but she's actually absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
The incidence of sexually transmitted diseases in the senior population is on the rise.
Yes.
And so you can't just assume because you find a new fella at the senior living community where you live that you can have safe sex. I mean, it's safe if you don't protect yourself. You got to protect yourself because you don't know. So,
Well,
a little
and-
more than I like to am comfortable talking about, but
Just one thing, because I could, I don't want to, you're doing a fantastic job, by the way. The other thing that we have to remember about this particular group of geriatrics is that they never, ever received sexuality education. The future generations might be a little bit more, advanced, like my father, he better not be out there just doing, because I'll get him, but and then my son won't have to worry about me as much. And so the more of it is that's kind of the problem. So you really have to look at this group never got sexuality education. The worst that they could get was maybe herpes or pregnant, right? Like that was the disease of that geriatric generation. So I do think it does fall on the people who are the caregivers to look at the signs, look at like what do diseases look like so that you can know, because the biggest joke in sexuality education is they have it and then they forget that they have it, and then they're meeting new people and they don't know that they have it, and that is part of what's making it spread.
So one thing I want to point out, in a community like I work in a memory care community, most of those folks have a medical power of attorney that has been put into place, and that is because they can no longer make decisions for themselves because of their cognition. So in that instance, we can step in and we can notify a family member. We can say, we believe there might be something going on. Now, we're not going to tell them the other resident's name, but we're going to say, we might believe there might be something going on with your mom. She's found a gentleman and we believe there might be more to it. So then the children can look into it because there's a medical power of attorney in place. In those long-term care facilities that I was talking about earlier, often those folks are still of sound mind. They still make their own decisions. Therefore, they are protected by HIPAA laws, which says that as a staff member in that community or in that facility, we cannot say anything to their children. We have no right to say anything to their children. It is against HIPAA laws. So we can't say we think there's something going on. But in a community like ours where there's a lot of medical power of attorneys, now assisted living, that's the tap dance. Because some of those folks are completely of sound mind, make all their own decisions, and some of those folks are not. So it all depends.
And the other thing that's real hard for people to understand is that if I lack the capacity to make a health care decision, and so my health care power of attorney is activated and whoever it is can make my decisions for me, what I do with my own body may or may not be a health care decision,
Right.
depending upon my cognitive level. So even people who have a healthcare power of attorney who's making healthcare decisions, they may still have the ability to decide what they want to do with their own body because it may not be a healthcare decision. Now, if I, as a caregiver, know that there's a sexually transmitted disease involved, now it is a healthcare issue.
Right.
And so I better deal with it. I mean, I have a responsibility to deal with it. But that's also very hard for children, adult children, to understand, is that even if mom has some dementia, mom still may have the ability to make decisions about what she does with her own body, because that's not necessarily a healthcare decision. And that's real hard for kids to understand. And so we have to go there sometimes too.
I have a question. You had identified typically there is an unmet need.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is, and I don't know what the research around this is, when there is inappropriate sexual behaviors, I know when an individual is institutionalized in a facility or such, healthcare providers are trained not to provide hugs and kisses and affection, that it's supposed to be a professional boundary and such. So are there studies that indicate if we increased appropriate contact, just intimacy, not sexual intimacy, but just intimacy, is there a decrease in inappropriate sexual behaviors? I don't know the studies behind that.
So I don't know that I can answer that exactly to the point. So I have never read a study specifically that was linked to decrease in sexual behaviors. There are studies that will support that a person who still has those needs met, so that touch, that feel, that hug, they're more happy in general, and they therefore have less behaviors. I will tell you, in our community, we are not trained not to hug our residents. I can't tell you how many hugs I give a day. How many times I'm walking down the hall hand in hand with one of my residents, because that's what makes them happy. I hear my associates on my floor more than one time a day tell them, "Did you know that I love you?" They need to hear it. They are still people. We are their family. They see us every single day. Of course they still have their family. Of course they still need their family. But if they don't feel like they belong in our community, they're not going to be happy. So I have never read any research specifically to your question, but I will tell you that a happy person or a person who's comfortable in their environment typically has less behaviors and less unmet needs, whatever those might be. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to stand by this table.
I can't necessarily speak again specifically to sexual behavior, but the phenomena of not having touch is called skin hunger. And so yes, the answer is yes. To what degree we still are researching, but the answer is yes. Those behaviors decrease because the symptoms of what is called skin hunger, which is a lack of consistent consensual non-sexual touch, overall decrease. And that's not just in geriatric people, in
people in general.
People in general, we see less aggression, we see less road rage, we see people sleeping better when they're getting more touch, we see them processing food better. So the answer is yes, we just don't know to what degree. And that's why I think with her being the presenter, I'll take it, because you guys can't get mad at me, but yes, the answer is yes. Now, that's because that need is being met and it's being rechanneled, but the phenomena is called skin hunger. So if you're going to look, most people are looking at touch deprivation. What you're talking about and what they're talking about is not touch deprivation. It's called skin hunger. You're welcome.
So, like I said earlier with the person going to another person's bed, it is human nature that we want to feel close to other people. It is human nature that we want to feel connected to people. And so that's why, and some people are super affectionate and some people are not. That's just how, we are. So it's just important that we, this thing fell off. It's important that we still try to meet those needs. So she is right that healthcare professionals, a lot of times in nursing homes, those kind of communities, they really are taught to kind of keep this space. It's a lot different when you're not being micromanaged by an accrediting source who is a funding source, like Medicaid. So we have a lot more, we are able to do a lot more things in a community like I work in, where it's private pay and it's an assisted living license, because there is not this oversight hounding these rules into us. And so, we're not going to get in trouble if our corporate office walks in and we are hugging one of our residents. We're not. We do lots of things in our engagements department, which is what I'm the director of. We do like what we call meditation and spa. So we turn on soft music and have diffusers going. We're simply massaging the residents' hands, massaging the back of their neck. Human touch is so important, and the meaningful human touch is more important than the human touch where we are having to get them up, because we still have to transfer them, we're still having to bathe them, we're still having to do all of those tasks, but they still need that meaningful human touch, is what I call it. So those massages, those things are so super important as far as decreasing behaviors. Okay, I don't have a whole lot more time. I know I'm supposed to be kind of wrapping it up here. So real quick, ways to remain intimate. This kind of touches on what they were just saying. Putting lotion on a loved one. So it's a husband and a wife. One thing you can do is, well, I see some faces up here. Lotion, back rubs. That is intimacy, guys. Putting lotion on their back, rubbing the feet. Those provide such good intimacy. Those are the kind of things we can still do in our communities like I live in. That's what I was just talking about. Scented lotions, those things for aromatherapy, super important. Combing and brushing hair. Every single morning at Silverado, we start our day with Spruce Up Club. Every resident in our community will have on shoes, dressed appropriately like they dressed when they lived at home. Everyone's wearing makeup, everybody's hair is fixed. So that's how we start our day. That is our entire team is curling hair, blow drying hair, putting on makeup. We want them to feel as normal as they did at home. It's super important for our well-being. If I'm laying in my pajamas at home doing nothing, I don't have the same sense as if I've gotten up and I've gotten myself dressed and I had something to do. So at Silverado, that is a huge belief for us. So if we have a resident walking down the hall with no shoes on, somebody before a director comes down the hall better say, hey, where's your shoes? We're not going to make a big deal about it. We're going to say, we're going to go get their shoes and help them put them on. We're not going to scold them for not wearing their shoes. We're just going to make sure we've got those shoes on. We don't want a director to come down the hallway and see a resident without shoes on. It's important that they're wearing shoes, and not house shoes. Shoes, guys. Clothes and shoes, not pajamas. Clothes and shoes. After breakfast, everybody gets dressed. Pajamas are not clothes. Dancing. We have dances all the time. It is so important, and it's something that a husband and a wife can still do, even if that person has dementia. That dancing is so important. I got a video yesterday of this beautiful couple that lives in our community, and we always have music playing all throughout our community, but one of their favorite songs came on and they got up and they were dancing, and I'm like, can I take a picture? Anyways, such a cute couple, but they've always danced. Range of motion exercises. This is a great one. You hold their hands sitting side by side, and we're going to just lift our arms, put them down, pull them out, put them back together. That is beneficial in many ways. You're doing it slow, you're not pulling, you're really just range of motion. It's so important for a person with dementia, especially in the later phases. Cutting and polishing nails. Husbands, if you have a wife who has dementia, men like it too, but ladies who've always liked their nails painted, again, that is great. It's almost like they're going to a spa, but just that touch of holding hands and painting the nails, and it's a great way to find some intimacy. Helping feed a loved one. This is so hard. In the later stages, often a person with dementia cannot feed themselves anymore. It's really hard, and I personally believe that it's harder on children to feed their parents than spouses, but feeding that person can really do something for you. You feel like you're still meeting that need that they need. So when they're happy, you can see that they're enjoying the food, and there's something about being able to still provide them with something that is beneficial for the caregiver. I think for adult children, I personally think, I have not read any research, so don't quote me on it, but I personally feel like adult children are more apprehensive for that feeding than a spouse. I feed residents all the time, and it's very heartwarming, because if there's one joy that they still have, it is food. Food a lot of times. Now, at the very end, we start losing that sense of taste too, but in the middle stages, when food, y'all, my residents love food. We do Bistro Club almost every day because it's all about food. You can still enjoy it. Bathing or showering together. So they're still at home. Bathing's a task. They don't want to do it. What if you showered with them? Get in the shower with them. Make it, it doesn't even have to be sexual, but it can be intimate. It can be, they feel comfort. So a lot of times showering is scary. They're scared that the water could be cold or hot, or really it's just unknown, that fear of that hitting you. Not real, it's just kind of a scarier process as you move through dementia. But if you're in the shower with them, doing it with them, there's less fear. So that's another way. And I'm going to just flip through some of these because I know we need to to kind of get done here. So I want to touch this real fast. I've already hit most of these, but I just want to make sure I've said them all. So how to respond to unacceptable behaviors. Do not scold or shame, okay? They don't realize what they're doing. So let's not scold or shame. Observe what triggered the behavior. That's the key in the question you asked me earlier. What's triggering the behavior? What's setting this off? If they're taking their clothes off, is it the same time of day? Is it that they need to go to the restroom? Is it that that tag's bothering them? We're looking for what's triggering it, what's setting it off. Sometimes you'll see that a certain person is the trigger. That person might remind them of their spouse or their whomever. There can be a visual trigger that makes them think of it. It can be a hearing trigger. A certain song comes on that was like, we all have things that throughout our lives are triggers for us, and we kind of cling to them, and that, when something comes on, it reminds you of something. A person with dementia still has those triggers, and they might, little things, so it's real important that we are paying attention to those triggers and trying to pinpoint what they are, because then we can redirect the behavior by making sure those triggers aren't happening. I keep going back to the tags and clothes because that is a huge thing with dementia patients, people, whatever you want to call it. They're itchy, they're bothering them. It is a big thing, is the tags. And so it can cause all kinds of chaos, and it's like something so small, but they can't tell us, and it's uncomfortable. Or, like you put on a jacket and it's really tight right here, and it just ruins your whole day because you're just uncomfortable. It's those kind of things, and they can't tell us. They don't know to just take that jacket off. So the whole day you might just see behavior after behavior after behavior because they can't voice to you that it's just that this, whatever I'm wearing is super uncomfortable. Or my shoe is too tight. Those little bitty things like that can really make a huge difference. Ignore annoying behaviors. That's hard to do. I'll be real honest with you. But again, if you don't scold or shame, you have to find a way to ignore those little behaviors. Now, not big behaviors, but if it's something little that's really not hurting anybody, it's not harmful, you just kind of have to let it go sometimes. Praise and encourage acceptable behaviors. A person with dementia still needs encouragement, still needs support, still needs love. So definitely try to encourage. How about we stop there? Now I'm going to open it up to questions. I know we've done some questions as we went through, but definitely if there's any questions, I will take them now.
I want to say one word real quick because we were talking about inappropriate behaviors and are we misreading it? Is it sexual or not sexual, and what caused it and what triggered it and all that kind of stuff. And last night I was out at Genesis United Methodist Church and took one of our Teepa Snow videos and showed that for them. And I was reminded as I watched the video that sometimes we are the trigger.
Yes.
Because of the way that we approach the person. And those of you that saw the movie when we showed Teepa's video about the progression of dementia and the gems, and you'll remember that she talks about how did we walk up to someone and approach them, and why she's so strong on extend your hand when you're a ways out. Don't get in somebody's intimate space until you've gotten permission to get into their intimate space. So reach out your hand and shake, and then remember the part about move to the side. Hey, how you doing? And then I want to slide around and come to the side, because now, if I'm here and you're a man, what's right at your eye level? What's at your eye level? Well, why do you think they reach out and touch stuff? Okay, because I'm right. Now, you be nice, but I'm right in your face, you see. So, yeah. And so, but we triggered it, and that's what she's saying. She's reminding us that we're the ones who triggered. And one of the things she said last night on the video that I'd forgotten about was, let's get your clothes off and get you into bed. That's not the way to say that, is it? No. I mean, how about let's help you change your clothes and put your pajamas on and get ready for bed, or even leave off the bed part. But just, it's sometimes we are the ones that triggered the issue. And sexuality at the time it wasn't even in their head, but we brought it up because of the way that we approach people. So sometimes. Absolutely. Yeah, so we have to be careful about that. Inappropriate behaviors are sometimes we're the ones that trigger them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anybody have questions?
Tell us your name again.
My name is Nikki Brown, and I'm a licensed master social worker.
One other question that comes up. Oh, well, let me let you do yours. Okay, I was just going to say that one of the things that often happens is that the husband doesn't recognize the wife. The wife doesn't recognize the husband. And whichever one has dementia is now in a care facility, in a memory care facility. And now she doesn't know her husband. She lives in the memory care. She's got a boyfriend. That's a huge issue for a lot of folks. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. That is very common. Not even just folks who live in a community. So often, when I was at the association, I worked with many couples in their home. That was kind of the thing there as I was going into their homes. Very common. Husband or wife, whomever has dementia, doesn't know anymore that that's their spouse. Because with dementia, we often revert backwards. And so the way they remember their spouse is often not the way we look now. So it becomes very difficult for the caregiving spouse, the person without the dementia, because they might say things like, "You're not my wife, you're not my husband," those things like that, because that's not how they remember you. Now, when you come into a community, she is absolutely right. Often they have forgotten that they are married. They have forgotten that that person is their spouse. But hey, Mr. So-and-so looks okay. So they cling to each other because they're together all the time. So they cling to each other, they eat together, they walk together, they hold hands. Talking to families, talking to the spouse is the most difficult thing ever. Because either A, you're going to have the spouse that is mad and irate and wants us to stop it, or you're going to have the spouse that says, "I just want them to be happy in their environment and it's going to be okay." And so you're talking to the spouse and you're reminding them that it's not that they are necessarily seeking out another person, it's the disease process, and that, they just can't remember. I can tell you we have more than one of each of those scenarios now. It happens all the time. And again, that's one of those touchy subjects because you can't, when you're dealing with two parties, you have to be very careful about what you say to who. And of course, say this person with dementia is married, this one just has children, and so it's really a dancing, every situation is different. It's so super important that the staff is highly trained in how to deal with it. That's why when you're looking at communities, if anybody is ever looking at communities, that you're really asking about the education of the staff members, because we need to be careful how we approach those conversations. It's very common.
I have a 95-year-old mother.
Okay.
Yeah, she's actually 94, but this weekend she'll be 95.
Wow.
So she lives in an independent living apartment, and there are 20 units, and Steve is 2 doors down from her, and he's 99.
Wow.
And this is the way she has handled his, and she told me initially, "Oh, I've known him forever. He's Playboy since he was 30. Anyway, he will come down and, they keep their doors in those units, open. And he opens the door and come in. She learned pretty quickly to divert his interest. Like she'll say, "Steve, would you mind getting that broom out of this closet? I just can't reach up there anymore." Or, "Steve, would you mind going out and getting my newspaper? Because I can't bend down today." And changes his, he doesn't come often.
But one, smart man. No, one important thing to know there, though, is that he still feels needed. So he comes down there and he's still getting a sense of being needed. So even if it is getting the broom for her or getting the newspaper for her.
She doesn't want to chase him away, but, she
right.
just redirects
Sure.
him.
So that's a good tactic by her, because maybe she does want to be his friend, but maybe she doesn't want to be sexual, but she's still providing him with something, because men need to feel needed. That women do too, but a man often, their whole lives, and especially this generation of men, has always been the breadwinner and has always been the one who helps. And so he probably feels like he's helping her, even though in her mind, she's diverting.
The door pretty quickly.
Well, sure. He's smart. He doesn't want to keep working, but that's important.
I wanted to address the other side of that. If the the wife is in the dementia care community and the husband is still independent, how about meeting his needs?
Very good. That's a very good question. I personally think, this is my personal opinion, that the wife would probably want his needs to be met. So in a community like ours where they live independently, those things could take place in our community with the door shut. And the husband could still have his needs met. If a wife can no longer meet his needs, and there might come a time that he might need to meet those needs elsewhere, be it through his own actions or with someone else. I would personally, as a counselor talking to a husband in that situation, I would personally tell him that I would, so here's the hard question here, is religion. So a man is going to feel like he is being, that he's cheating essentially. And so there's going to be those emotions. So it's going to depend on religion. So as the counselor talking to that man, I'm going to have to be very careful because my answer is going to be different depending upon that person's situation. I have to keep my beliefs out of the scenario. But if we have a man who, I don't know the answer. It's going to depend on the situation. But I think it's very important that the husband's needs are met. However that is. The husband is going to have his needs met in order for him to remain a happy husband. So we need him, we as the staff members need him to continue to coming to the community. We need that relationship to stay and to stay there. However, in the very late stages of dementia, there's probably not going to be any retrospect coming back from that wife. So I'm going to have a different answer in every situation as to how I would deal with that. But ultimately, I'm going to say that there would need to be a way to find a way to meet that husband's needs, however that is. So every person's going to be a little different depending on their situation.
And we have to get beyond our own values and not judge people. And whereas that might be totally outside of my value system, it's not my place to dictate values to you. Now, from a Christian perspective, we have certain values, but again, and of course, I come at it from a nurse perspective and working in a community. And there are strict rules about us dictating our values to other people in community. So we're just not allowed to do that.
So that's what I was saying was, if I was the counselor in the situation where I was meeting with this husband, is it doesn't matter what I believe myself. It's going to depend on their specific situation and their belief system. And then based off of kind of what they're thinking and what their belief system is, then I would try to find some way to provide direction without imposing my own thoughts into my own beliefs.
And then we need to, think about, okay, so how do single people get those needs met if we believe that you should be celibate outside of marriage? So, there are lots of things that we can talk about, but in the end, we do have to respect the person's own needs and hope that we are able to offer some suggestions that would fall within their beliefs and values. And that's a hard thing. Okay, that's a hard thing for this little preacher's wife to say, and that is, I have to respect their values because our values may be very, very different. But it is a difficult situation. It is something that we have to deal with. In licensed communities, we really do have to deal with that when the one that lives with us has dementia, but the other one's still independent and maybe still lives at home. And that can be very difficult. And here's our sexuality expert here. We're so glad you came today.
Well, I thank you. And along the lines of that, the ambiguous guilt, ambiguous grief, where you've lost someone who isn't actually gone. That's the ambiguous grief that we're talking about. Again, I just wanted to know what do you do with the family? So now dad is, you are working with dad to deal with ambiguous grief. Dad is grieving. Maybe dad wants to go get a girlfriend and, you support that. What happens on that tertiary layer of family? Does that impact?
It does. So ultimately, in a community like ours, we are dealing with whomever the primary caregiver is most of the time. Now, we are very supportive of the entire family. So in a situation like that, if we had kids who were
You
on a
told
different,
my dad he could cheat on my mom, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. I'm just mapping it out.
yes. So number one, you would never tell or give permission
Right.
because that's not our job. Our job is to offer suggestions or, help them process their own feelings. But a lot of times when we're dealing with adult children,
Yes.
and especially when you get, so families who have been divorced and now they're together, and so you have step siblings. Oh, my goodness. It can become a nightmare because some siblings feel one way. Now, just big families in general, you get lots of siblings and they can bicker and fight, don't get me wrong. But often what I'm telling that family is you need to respect their decisions. Okay? So it's not our job to question our parents. It's not our, let them make their own decisions. And that is hard for adult children because we can be bossy. We can be really bossy. We want to control the situation where at the end of the day, we have no right to control the situation. So me as the counselor in the situation, I'm going to be saying, number one, I'm going to help them to understand why their parent feels the way they do. So help them kind of figure out whatever the situation is. So we're helping them kind of understand what's happening here. And then we're saying, think about it from this point of view. So if it's, they're bickering about this thing. I mean, we're talking about your dad has needs. Your dad has desires. He's still a person, or your mom has needs. And so children need to hear that, and they need to hear it from somebody other than their parent often, or their family member. They need to hear somebody else telling them that those needs are there. They hear it differently. And so then you kind of start to talk about, scenarios, so what is it about the situation that makes you so upset? Often it's going to be that they feel like they're betraying mom or dad. And so then you have to go down the road of mom or dad or whomever is no longer mom or dad as you see it, as you perceive it, because this disease has taken over. And so helping them kind of understand that process, because we are trained to look at mom and dad and grandma and grandpa the way we have our whole lives. So now it's really hard for us to process that life is different. And so it's all about helping that family kind of work through that particular situation. There's no right or wrong answer. Mm-hmm. It's going to be different in every situation, again, depending upon where that family is right now.
Let me just, you got one. Here we go.
I was just going to say, I formerly worked inside a memory care community, and what I see is that spouse who doesn't live at the community needs encouragement and ideas from the staff to help them get their needs met, because they tend to think that part of my life is over because my spouse is here now. And so the community has to be creative and say, we can put a sign on the door, do not disturb, encourage couples events so they can be together and spend time together even though they can't have the same level of intimacy that they had before the disease. Because the biggest thing that spouses and other family members deal with is the ongoing grief and loss. Mm-hmm. And I had a support group that met every monthly, and every month we ended up talking about the losses that they experienced, the things that I lose because my spouse, my mom, has this disease. She's losing it, but I'm losing it too. The expectations of the things that we thought we would be doing at this juncture in our life, or the things that are coming forward that we were looking forward to, and now it's going to look different than what it was. And so we have to get creative as professionals and as friends and support systems to help them think outside the box. Because just like Nikki was saying, there's ways to get the feeling of intimacy met without having sexual intercourse. But we have to be creative and look for those opportunities and create ways where they can be together and do things that are meaningful. It's a lot about how meaningful the relationship is, and that's what families lose, is they feel like they've lost their meaning. So we have to give them opportunities to have what we used to call, where I was at, is meaningful moments throughout their day. Their whole day is not going to be good. My whole day is not always good every day. but just to know that they have meaningful moments and opportunities to smile and enjoy life some part of that day, then we've made it a good day for them.
So in the community that I currently work at, we have lots of events that we invite families to. So like next week is both Mardi Gras and Valentine's Day. So I kind of had to pick and choose. I'm like, which one do I want to do? So Valentine's Day, we're just going to have a special dinner. We are very fortunate that we have an awesome culinary department with a chef that comes from a country club background, and we special cook everything. It's like cruise ship style. But he's doing a special dinner that night, and I've invited families, asked for RSVPs. We're doing little things like champagne and a chocolate fountain, soft music playing. What you find is that the families become friends. So the ladies who have husbands there, they become friends and they become a support group for each other. Same thing with the husbands. We have a whole group of husbands that are like a men's club, essentially, a men's social. Actually, right now they were having, I had set up Fuddruckers Hamburger Bar, and they were having beer, and they just come and they sit and they just enjoy each other's company because they become like family. So Valentine's night, we'll have chocolate fountain and champagne, and we'll have a little dance. Often you'll see families dancing with each other because they're there so often, they get to know each other on a different level. And so those are the kind of things that we really want to encourage, is that they come and they have meaning in their visit. So it's not just that we're coming and we're just sitting in their room, but find ways to incorporate those families into the community. A lot of my volunteers are family members. They like to come, they like to do those things, they like to go on outings. So we go to Top Golf. Typically it's one or two of my associates and family members, because we have a bunch of avid golfers. Things like that. We're doing water aerobics. We take them out to a gym for water aerobics. I have family members who go. Guess what? I pay for those family members just like I do pay for my residents, because we want the family to be involved with them. We want them to have meaningful moments. We want them doing things like that.
I became part of a support group that's out at White's Chapel United Methodist Church 4 years ago. And it's called COPE, Children of Aging Parents. And I have gone off and on to learn about my aging parent. And she always calls the day I'm going, and she'll say, what are you going to learn today about me? You know. But anyway, we need to have more of those. I've gone off and on. I have learned so much. A lot of these adult children are not facing dementia in their parents, but just the aging process.
Absolutely.
And the medical aspects and the fact that your organs are falling apart and everything. It's very, very supportive. And I have thought that this church, for example, needs to establish one. We have so many people that have aging parents. So that's the kind of support group that you want. And the medical staff that are members of White's Chapel, they participate. So they offer.
That's a good point. I haven't seen many of those support groups that are just for aging in general versus, so that's something to definitely think about. I agree. There should be more of those, because not all seniors have dementia. Lots of people think they do, but they don't. Not all seniors do.
We're all aging, so we can learn for ourselves too. But I wanted to reveal now, my mother is a resident of Silverado. And I wanted to put in a plug for you all do some great activity or engagements. And one of the nice things that I've enjoyed is, Laura and I both, is to go to the support group, the Lunch Bunch.
Lunch Bunch.
And you all host that for all the family members away from the community, that we can enjoy visiting with each other. So that's been very meaningful.
So what she's talking about is once a month, we invite any family members who want to come. We take them to Saltgrass on Silverado's Dollar. And everybody gets to order what they want, and it's a social hour. It's a time, or 2 hours really. It's a time for families to get to know families, to talk about their struggles, to talk about what's going on, talk about Silverado and what we're not doing right. Holly is typically the one who goes to that. I went to the last one. I didn't meet you guys, or I'd have known you were Silverado family. So it's little things like that. We also do support groups in our community. They're at the community that are more structured with like educational literature, but Lunch Bunch is supposed to be fun. It's just a group of family members who want to come together and eat and get to know each other. It's a very fun. We have all kinds of events. Unfortunately, not all communities can do that. Not all communities have that budget. We're expensive. So we need to deliver. So that's all there is to it. And I don't have a problem saying that. I feel like we are expensive and we need to deliver to the price that these folks are paying. So we do lots of big events like that. And some places just can't.
One of the outcomes of the COPE group at White's Chapel is that they have many family members there that do have an older family member who has some form of dementia, and they love to participate in choirs. So the choirs there, they have multiple choirs, but the choirs have taken on the responsibility of being a buddy for the aging parent who has dementia. And that person stands with that person in choir practice and then on Sunday.
Love it. That's a great idea.
And anytime there's a choir affair, then the adult children don't have to be the one responsible.
Love it.
And it's
That's a
a
great idea.
beautiful way to allow those people who love to sing and enjoy music to participate.
Well, music is one thing that a person with dementia typically will hold on to through the very end. So those familiar songs, because that is a different part of our brain that's being affected there. Music is a huge part. I love that idea. I have not heard that. It's a great idea in the early stages. That would be a great idea in those early stages when a person can still live at home but is starting to have some difficulties. As a person progresses, probably wouldn't work out so well. But in the earlier stages, that's a fan. I love it. I mean, if we could get more churches doing that, it gives a person, they still have that meaning. So they're going to continue to come to church longer because they feel like they have a reason to come to church. If you feel like you're a part of something, you continue to go. When you feel like you are no longer a part of something, then you kind of withdraw from it. So if we could get more churches doing that, we'd keep them active longer.
Just kind of along the lines of that and going back to touch, we know that there are ways that touch is also a different part of the brain, and that body memory is actually longer than mental memory. Do you do anything in the world of touch to teach the caregiver that there are particular ways that they can touch the person that they're giving care, so that they remember the touch even if they don't remember who you are, so that that person becomes associated with like I do it with my son now. So my son will hold there's a particular way on the side of my face, because I know I'm much older than he is. I started late. So I have already trained him to touch me in a particular way that even if I don't remember him, his name, who he is for me, I remember he's the person that touches me that way. Is there anything in that realm?
No, not particularly. Nothing that I can think of. I mean, we train all of our associates to touch in a certain way. And that's something that Teepa Snow teaches, as well as the underhand versus the overhand. There's a lot of those things with dementia residents, but not anything to the way you're speaking of it.
Right.
That's interesting. I would be interested to see what research says about that as far as learning a person by the way that they touch you.
Right. So like if you have several different family members, like one person, like Sue always touches me on my right. shoulder, and that is the way that Sue communicates. So even though as it progresses, I might not remember Sue, but I remember this.
My initial thought is if it's something that started very early in life, it would probably continue. A person who has already been diagnosed with dementia, it's probably not something we could start. Now, if it is something that was established in a marriage early on, there's a certain way. A lot of times the touch, the feeling of the hand, those things, they're already going to kind of pick up on it. But where you're saying a specific place, I think it could work. In my mind, I'm thinking, that could probably work. But I'm thinking it would be something that would require some research and kind of figuring that out. Yeah. Now, there is a lot of research that says we should touch certain ways with dementia. In other words, we're going to always approach from the front, not the back. It can be startling if you come up behind somebody. You're going to go underhand, because if you go overhand, it's kind of demanding. There's a lot of those things as far as touch goes. But I have never heard of kind of that particular thing.
One of the things Teepa does remind us, though, is that the relationship is what is critical, and they will remember the emotion even though they don't remember the person. So even if I don't know who it is that touches me here, the emotion of being touched here, that's a positive emotion. And so I will remember that, even though I don't know maybe who gave it, to your point that maybe
Right.
we didn't start it, early
Right.
in life. But just the positive emotion, and it's the other reason why we don't want to be fighting with people, because then it's a negative emotion.
Right.
And so that's why our approach, the way that we approach them, speak to them, care for them, that is critical, because it all relates back to the emotion, and it's the relationship that's critical. She says, greet before you treat. To me,
Yes.
treat is anything that you do with them. It's not treat necessarily medically. It's, I may be going to offer them a cup of coffee, but I better greet first and not just shove a cup of coffee in somebody's face. All of that is so critical. So, All right, it's 1 o'clock, so I want to be faithful to your time. Thank you, Nikki, so much for coming. We
Absolutely.
appreciate your coming, especially your willingness to fill in at the last minute. So thank you
Has
very,
my mic
very
been
much.
off for a while? Nope, it's on.
No, it's on. You're still going. So be careful what you say. Remember that we're doing this again at 5:30, and so if there are friends or family members that you want to invite, and Nikki will not be with us this evening, but Holly Glover will. She's also with Silverado, and so she'll be with us this afternoon at 5:30. So thank you all very much for coming. Be sure and pick up brochures and things over here. And Alzheimer's Association has things in the back. Please take a few minutes and look at theirs. They may be something that you haven't seen before and that you'd like to pick up. And remember, for those of you that haven't heard, their spring forum is coming up in March. So I'm sure there must be flyers back there about the Alzheimer's Spring Forum in Arlington, and you'll want to go to that. It's really, really good.